Hi there. I'm going to give a demonstration of a new type of spread I created. Basically, I call this the South Indian or Jaimini Astrology Tarot Spread. And it's based off of the South Indian astrology chart, which looks similar to this. Basically, the only difference being that each of these places is like a box and the edges are flush with one another. I changed it slightly, mostly because A, it kind of looks nicer this way, and B, it helps to get the whole thing in the camera frame. I don't have like a wide angle lens camera or anything like that, so this was kind of a way I could reduce the size of the spread. Otherwise it's kind of unwieldy and large because the tarot cards aren't nice squares, they're rectangles. So that kind of, it makes it look odd if I do it the other way. In any case, this is a really simple thing to read and to remember once you understand it. So basically, the sign Aries is always here, okay? And then it moves it moves clockwise. Normally, the signs move counterclockwise in most astrological charts. Here, they move clockwise. It's the only chart that appears to be that way. So Aries, Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, and Pisces. So the four mutable signs are always the four corners, which is significant in the system of astrology that Jaimini outlines. And then basically we have these signs ruled by Mars and Venus, right? Venus and Mars. So Mars and Venus are there. And then we have Moon, Sun, and Saturn, right? So we have the lights and then we have Saturn. So pretty easy to remember once you just take a moment and commit that to your memory. And so you just shuffle like you would for any deck, okay? You just shuffle like you would for any spread. And then you put the cards out starting with Aries. So you're always just going to start here, regardless of what sign you're going to read from as the ascendant. I'll talk about that in a moment. And then you take the bottom card. Sorry, my deck's a little funky right now. Sorry, you take the bottom card, which is this card, right? You take the bottom card and put it in the center, and that's the 13th card, which is going to tell us kind of an overview of the situation. It's sort of the card that ties everything together and, in a sense, shows what's kind of the most important thing for the person right now. Like, it's kind of like the heart of the matter, or what's at the root of things, you know, kind of like in the Celtic cross. So, okay, that part of it's simple, right? And then the next part is choosing an ascendant. Well, if you're reading for somebody, it's best to use this spread if you know their ascendant. If you don't know their ascendant, you could read for their moon sign. And if you don't know their moon sign, you could read for their sun sign. In the event that they don't know any of their signs, you can use a 12-sided dice. Hold on a sec. You could use a 12-sided dice just like they use in Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, and this, I actually have this from an old Dungeons and Dragons dice set when I used to play Dungeons and Dragons. Sorry, it's a little hard to see, but the light... No, it's okay, you can see it. Okay, so anyway, in the event of that, you can have them concentrate, you know, and so on, and roll the dice. And if they, you know, got 8, like we have here, right? Oops, sorry. 8. Then basically you would read from Scorpio, which is right here. You know, and if you need the count, that's okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, but so you would just read from there as the ascendant if you really had to. If you, in the event that you don't have one of these dice and you don't want to go get one, you could do something simple like collect pistachio shells or take rice grains, and you could take a large number of them. But traditionally in India, there was a practice in one type of astrology where they'd take shells, and they'd have 108 shells, and then they'd like take a big pile of them, and then they would reduce that to a number 12 or below, and finding the remainder basically. And then, or reduce it, I mean they would count the shells and then like if there were 49 shells, right? Let's say that there was 49 shells, then that would basically be 1, because when you subtracted 12, the lowest number you'd get to would be 1. Or if it was like 52, you'd be 4. So you'd select the 4th sign or the 1st sign and so on. In light of that, you could also, there's so many other things you could do. You could, have the person meditate and choose a number between 1 and 108, whatever comes to mind, and then do the same thing, divide it by 12 and take the remainder and select the sign. So a lot of things you can do, but this spread was mainly designed by myself to read for a person when you actually know one of their key astrological factors, starting with the ascendant, moving to the moon, and then moving to the sun if you don't have the ascendant and if you don't have the moon. So that was kind of the idea behind this spread. And you just read it like you would any normal spread, and then the signs and houses, or sorry, you should know the house, you should know the house meanings. The signs play a different role here in Jaimini's system of astrology, which I'll explain in a moment. But let's say like we got 8, okay, or we're deciding we're going to read for someone their Scorpio rising. So we start with this card, right? And this is the ascendant, and then we count clockwise for the other houses. So this is going to tell us something about their body, their mind, their focus right now, right? And it's the card Judgment, so you just interpret, judgment. Perhaps they're judging themselves harshly, or they refuse to face the cold, hard reality that's, they can't escape from, and that kind of a thing, because it's upside down. Then you look at the second house, right? The second house is the 7 of Wands, right? So some kind of struggle financially, right? They're perhaps fending off tax collectors or something like that. Who knows, right? If it's family stuff, perhaps their family's in a stressful period of time. Maybe everybody is attacking this individual, right? Or whatever, or there's some concern in the broader family, and thus there's a fight going on or whatever. Third house, siblings. Fourth house of home and well-being, happiness, private life. Fifth house of children, self-expression, joy, creativity. Sixth house of disease and challenges and enemies. Seventh house of partnerships and marriages and things like that, and opponents. Eighth house of, traditionally it's death, but eighth house of the unknown, basically, or you could say fear, and so on. But that's there's a lot of misconception about the eighth house, so perhaps I'll do a eighth house video at some point, clearing up those misconceptions. Ninth house of God, religion, philosophy, perspective, fortune, father, prophecy, and so on, dreams. 10th house of career, actions, superiors, power, notoriety, and so on. 11th house of friends, gains, hopes, wishes, ideals, groups, older siblings. And 12th house of undoing, loss, expenditures, prisons, phobias, insanity, but also surrender. So we're interpreting it just like we would an astrological chart, right? Just with no planets. Okay, and there actually is a way to use the planets with this spread, but I'm not going to go into that in this video because that's kind of advanced stuff. And you really don't need to if you know what you're doing. Okay, so the other unique thing about this spread as opposed to other astrology spreads and why it's set up the way it is because Jaimini had a special system of aspects wherein the signs aspected one another in a very, very peculiar manner that we don't really find in any other systems of astrology. And that is that cardinal signs, right, these are the cardinal signs, always aspect fixed signs, except the fixed sign next to them. So Aries won't aspect Taurus, but Aries will aspect Aquarius, Scorpio, and Leo, right? And so each cardinal sign is going to have a sextile to a fixed sign, a 6-8 relationship where Scorpio is the 8th from Aries, but as we'll see in a moment, Aries is the 6th from Scorpio, right? And these are always mutual aspects, okay? And then a trine. So it'll always have also a trine to a sign of the same element. So we have the sextile, right? Fire and air, the trine, fire, fire, and then the 6-8 relationship, which is water, fire, which is a difficult, challenging relationship normally, although Jaimini doesn't really say that that's the case. He just says they aspect one another. However, we can extend basic astrological logic to this scenario and say that in general, these signs, right, will be supportive and or just flow with ease. Even if they're not supported, there will be a certain level of ease. Whereas this sign, even if it is supportive, can mean, you know, an influence that's challenging or difficult, but is more generally going to be kind of a difficult influence and so on. And I'll demonstrate this in just a moment. Fixed signs do the exact same thing. They aspect all cardinal signs except the ones next to them. So Taurus is not going to aspect Aries, but Taurus is going to aspect Cancer by sextile, Capricorn by trine, and the 6-8 relationship with Libra. Now, again, Jaimini doesn't use trine and sextile and things like that. He doesn't care about that. So I'm kind of explaining it that way because most people are familiar with that, and I'm sort of just adding that in there as another way to take it a little bit further in terms of your interpretation. But by and large, you don't even want to think about that at first. You just want to know that when I'm interpreting, let's say, the first house, if Scorpios are ascendant because of the dice roll, as demonstrated earlier, then we know that this card is going to aspect it, this card is going to aspect it, and this card is going to aspect it. And that's all we need to know. We don't even necessarily need to understand that what houses these are, okay, for the purposes of interpreting it. We just need to know what the house under consideration is, and that's the first house here, okay? But likewise, if we were interpreting the 6th house and we're seeing the aspects upon that 6th house, okay, then we just interpret the 6th house as, you know, what does this card here say about enemies and things like that? And I would say, as an example, this could mean some sort of powerful enemy working behind the scenes because it's the King of Cups, okay? Somebody kind of getting in your way from behind the scenes who has a lot of secrets and influence and things like that. And then we look to see what is influencing this King of Cups enemy, right? That's what we're doing, okay? Or likewise, if it were showing more disease, another 6th house thing, right, we would do the same thing. And the point is what's influencing the enemies? What's contributing it or commingling with it, right? Well, obviously we have Judgment, 2 of Pentacles, and 8 of Wands. So if this were a regular spread, you would just think about like this card coming out signifying an enemy, and then these other cards coming out around it, right? Nothing really all that special to do. It's just like regular tarot, okay? Don't worry about the fact that this is the 1st house or this is the 4th house or this is the 10th house. Don't worry about that. It's not important. How does that affect this enemy, right? Well, we know that this enemy maybe wants something financially, right? We know that he's in a hurry, and we know that on some level he is stirring things up and perhaps commanding some kind of underworld. Again, secrets and so on. So that's what's going on there, right? This is like very simple to interpret that, okay? Very simple. Just basic tarot ideas. Now, the last signs I need to talk about are the mutable signs, the 4 corners. They all mutually aspect one another, which is interesting, right? Because those are all squares. And yet, again, Jaimini doesn't say that squares or anything like that are bad. And Jaimini also leaves out the opposition except for these 2 mutables, right? Opposite one another. So don't worry about the aspects. Don't worry about the planets. Just worry about the basic house significations and which positions are aspecting which other positions, and don't get too complicated, right? The mutable signs, yeah, they're just always at the 4 corners like that, and basically another interesting thing here is they represent the directions in between directions. So this would be northeast, and this would be southeast, and this would be northwest, and this would be southwest. And the reason is because this domain for Jaimini represents the east. This is the west, both cards, okay, and both signs. This domain is the north and this is the south, okay? And as you get more comfortable with this spread, you can start adding in the signs and their qualities and their elements into your interpretations if there's a need to, but you really don't have to at all, and you can be as simple with it as you possibly want to be. Okay? So that's the basic way to use this spread. And at a certain point, I plan to make some other videos on this, and I'll talk about other ways you can use astrological principles in this tarot spread and in other astrology tarot spreads. One more important thing that I forgot to do here, and I forgot to talk about, and it's totally optional, but one option you can also do is that if a major arcana comes out, the next card that comes out should be under the major arcana or mixed with it. So you'd actually have two cards, right? And then let's just say we had this card here. And same with the Wheel of Fortune. And that's all the majors we have for now, right? So what happens is you're shuffling, you know, and Hierophant comes out, okay? And let's say he comes out, let's say he came out first, okay? Then, you know, the next card that comes out, you put with him, all right? Unless it's another major arcana, and then you go and start a new sign/house. So that's a wonderful technique. And right here, you know, we can see that would tell us a whole lot of information already. It would tell us that the Hierophant is hanging out with one of his students, perhaps, you know, and that would lead to a whole bunch of interpretation or interpretational gold and whatnot. So I hope that this was helpful and instructive for those of you watching, and please do experiment with the Jaimini Astrology chart tarot spread. Thanks.